There are moments in live television when even the strongest personalities reveal something they never meant to show. For years, Simon Cowell built an entire career on sharp judgment, emotional distance, and an almost unbreakable sense of control, until Darci Lynne forced that wall to crack. What unfolded between a young artist fighting to redefine herself and the toughest judge in modern entertainment left millions stunned. And for Simon, it wasn't just about talent anymore. It was about witnessing a turning point he never thought he would see. The night everything changed. When Darci Lynne walked back onto the stage of America's Got Talent Fantasy League in 2024, no one expected what would follow. Least of all, Simon Cowell. For years, Simon had viewed her as one of the most remarkable success stories ever produced by the franchise. She was the shy Oklahoma girl who transformed ventriloquism into a mainstream phenomenon, the 12-year-old who stunned America with Summertime, the child prodigy who won season 12 with over 100 million votes behind her. In his mind, Darci's identity was defined by the flawless technique that allowed her to sing while keeping her lips perfectly still, partnered with puppets like Petunia, Oscar, and Edna Doorknocker. That was the formula that worked. That was the formula he believed she should never abandon. But when she returned in 2024, Darci walked onto the Fantasy League stage alone. No puppets, no comedy, no signature act. Instead, she stood there as a young woman who had outgrown a version of herself the world refused to let go of. Even before she opened her mouth, there was a tension in the room, the kind that comes when someone breaks away from who they were expected to be. And Simon felt it too. He had told her just weeks earlier that drifting away from ventriloquism was a mistake. He insisted the puppet and voice fusion was what made her special. He warned her publicly, saying her experimental shift toward pure singing was the wrong direction. But Darci didn't listen. She chose to perform an original song she had written herself, a quiet, vulnerable piece about choosing her own path instead of living inside expectations. For the first time, she wasn't hiding behind a puppet's personality or comedic brashness. She wasn't performing through a character. She was performing as herself. A risk that defied every rule. Darci Lynne's decision to abandon her puppets wasn't impulsive. It was the result of years of internal conflict, quiet frustration, and a growing desire to shed a label that had followed her since childhood. After winning America's Got Talent in 2017 at just 12 years old, she had spent more than half a decade performing across the country. Madison Square Garden, Caesar's Palace, national tours, Christmas specials, and television appearances. Every step of her journey was shaped by characters she had created: Petunia the diva, Oscar the anxious mouse, Edna the feisty retiree. They opened doors for her, but over time they also formed a cage. No matter how far she traveled or how much she matured, the world continued to see her as the little ventriloquist girl. By the time she reached her late teens, Darci quietly understood something she rarely admitted in interviews. She was outgrowing the persona that had made her famous. She was no longer the timid seventh grader who found comfort in letting a puppet speak her fears out loud. She was writing music, experimenting with acoustic instruments, and trying to step into her own voice rather than hide behind one created for a puppet. Her 2021 and 2022 tours hinted at that evolution. She began adding solo performances, guitar accompaniment, and even original songs. Some audiences welcomed it, others questioned why she wasn't doing more voices. That tension weighed heavily on her, and it was clear that any attempt to reinvent herself would meet resistance. Simon Cowell was one of the loudest skeptics. He admired her talent deeply, but he had always believed that her gift was inseparable from ventriloquism, that separating the art form from the voice meant losing what made her extraordinary. In earlier episodes of Fantasy League, He even warned her that leaning into singing could cost her progress in the competition. It wasn't said to discourage her, but to protect a winning formula he feared she was abandoning too soon. But Darci felt she had no choice. She knew she was entering a defining moment. A moment where she could either stay within the comfort of her childhood success or step forward into the uncertainty of adulthood. Her voice, her writing, and her identity were evolving faster than the public's perception of her. That night, she made a choice that defied every expectation placed on her, including Simon's. The performance that broke the room. The moment Darci Lynne began her performance, the studio shifted into a silence that didn't feel like typical anticipation. It felt heavier, as if everyone sensed she was standing at the edge of something irreversible. There were no bright personalities to distract the audience, no comedic dialogue between puppets to soften the impact. Instead, there was a young woman standing completely exposed, choosing vulnerability over spectacle. When the first lines of her original song emerged, raw, steady, and startlingly mature, it became clear that this wasn't a stunt. It was a declaration. For years, Darci's voice had been praised, but rarely heard without the filter of a puppet's character. Now, stripped of the illusion and the technical marvel of lip control, her voice carried a different weight. There was tremor, strength, fear, and conviction all layered together. She wasn't performing to impress. She was performing to be understood. The song was about choice, pressure, and the pain of being admired only for the version of yourself people want you to stay. It was a quiet confession masked as a melody, a message spoken not through a puppet, but directly from her own life. Judges who once critiqued her were suddenly still. Heidi Klum leaned in with visible surprise. Howie Mandel watched with disbelief, knowing he had never heard Darci sound like this before. But the most shocking reaction came from the one person most viewers assumed would remain stone-faced: Simon Cowell. As Darci continued singing, he didn't blink, didn't smirk, didn't prepare a sharp-edged comment. The man who built an empire on blunt criticism simply stared, almost frozen, as if the performance had reached a place even he couldn't judge. When the final note faded, the room stayed silent for a few seconds longer, the kind of silence that feels like a collective breath held too long. Then the applause erupted, but it wasn't the applause itself that mattered. It was the moment Simon lifted his hand to his face in an attempt to shield his reaction. Millions watched as his eyes brimmed with tears, a moment rarer than any golden buzzer in the show's history. The judge who finally admitted he was wrong. Simon Cowell had spent decades shaping the global entertainment landscape, discovering artists, dismantling egos, and rebuilding careers with his blunt honesty. He was feared, respected, and occasionally resented, but he was rarely surprised. That was why his reaction to Darci Lynne's song was so jarring. The moment the applause died down, he didn't rush to speak. He didn't seize control of the narrative. For once, he needed time to gather himself. And when he finally leaned into the microphone, his voice carried a hesitation that no one had ever heard from him before. He admitted calmly and publicly that he had been wrong. Just weeks earlier, Simon had insisted that Darci leaving ventriloquism behind was a mistake. He reminded her that her identity was intertwined with her puppets, that she risked losing the uniqueness that made her stand out. In his mind, she was walking away from the very thing that secured her place in entertainment history. But after witnessing her semi-final performance, the vulnerability, the maturity, the bravery, he realized the truth wasn't nearly that simple. He didn't just say she proved him wrong, he said she made him think again, a phrase that, coming from Simon Cowell, carried far more weight than applause or praise. He even acknowledged how difficult her choice must have been. Transitioning from a child star to a functioning adult artist is one of the hardest paths in entertainment, and Simon had seen many young performers crumble under that pressure. Darci, however, had done something most of them never dared to do. She confronted the expectations built around her and chose to walk through them instead of hiding behind them. For Simon, a man who had publicly clashed with contestants like Jennifer Hudson, David Cook, John Stevens, and many others, admitting fault was almost unheard of. Yet there he was, wiping tears, confessing that he underestimated her evolution. And behind that admission was something deeper. Simon wasn't just reacting to a performance. He was reacting to the end of Darci's childhood era. The realization that the young girl he had once guided was now standing in front of him as a grown artist who no longer needed his approval to take risks. It was the kind of moment that reminds judges and audiences alike that talent shows don't just create careers. They witness people growing up, changing, and sometimes outgrowing the boxes they were first placed in. The road that led her there. To understand why Darci Lynne's transformation struck Simon Cowell so deeply, you have to look back at the long, winding road that led her to this moment. Long before she stood alone on the Fantasy League stage, she was a painfully shy little girl from Oklahoma who could barely sing in front of her own classmates. Her family knew she had talent, but her stage fright was so intense that they struggled to help her find a way to express herself. Everything changed when she entered the International Cinderella Scholarship Program. Not only did she perform in front of a crowd for the first time, she won the title of International Mini-Miss, and, just as importantly, discovered a path forward. It was at that same event that she met Lisa Bonogisti, a teen ventriloquist whose performance captivated her. Darci saw someone doing what she dreamed of doing, expressing personality, humor, confidence, all without having to face an audience directly. It wasn't just entertainment. It was a shield, a bridge, a way out of her fear. With encouragement from her family and early guidance from ventriloquism coach Gary Owen, Darci began training relentlessly. Her improvement was rapid, almost shocking. Within 2 years, she had won competitions across Oklahoma, taken vocal lessons with coach Tiana Plemons, and built a small following long before she ever stepped onto the national stage. Her rise accelerated in 2016 with appearances on Little Big Shots in both the US and the UK, but nothing compared to 2017 when she auditioned for America's Got Talent at age 12. Her performance of Summertime with Petunia became one of the most iconic moments in AGT history, earning Mel B's Golden Buzzer and eventually leading her to win the season with more votes than any finalist before her. Overnight, she became a phenomenon, a child star whose composure, technique, and creativity were far beyond her years. Yet that success created a silent burden. Everywhere she went, she was framed as the puppet girl. Every headline, every interview, every stage introduction reinforced that identity. Even her tours, wildly successful as they were, repeatedly circled back to the same image. The world loved her, but only within the boundaries of the character they associated with her. As she grew older, the gap between who she was becoming and who people expected her to be grew wider. By the time she returned to AGT Fantasy League in 2024, Darci wasn't fighting a competition. She was fighting the weight of her own legacy, something far heavier than any puppet she had ever carried. Reinventing herself after the tears. After the emotional shockwave of her Fantasy League performance, Darci Lynne Farmer stepped into a new phase of her life, one defined not by puppets, not by childhood labels, but by the artist she had fought to become. Although she didn't advance to the finals, the impact of that night reached far beyond the competition. For the first time, viewers, judges, and critics saw her without the filter of nostalgia. They weren't watching the 12-year-old prodigy who once dazzled the country. They were watching a young woman choosing her own path, regardless of the risks. Darci had been preparing for this shift long before stepping back onto national television. Over the past few years, she had quietly developed her songwriting, experimented with music production, and practiced performing without the safety net of a puppet's persona. She began posting snippets of her original music online, sharing studio sessions, and letting fans see a side of her she had kept hidden for years. Her tours in 2021 and 2022 had already begun leaning toward solo artistry, with moments of pure singing becoming more common. And by 2023, she was writing songs that reflected her real life, pressure, identity, fear, ambition, and the difficult reality of growing up in the public eye. Her decision to introduce Push Our Luck, an original song on Fantasy League, was not a gamble for attention. It was a declaration of independence. She wanted the world to see her as she truly was, a singer, musician, and storyteller, not just a child ventriloquist who happened to be talented. In interviews following her performance, she said plainly, "I'm not 12 anymore. I want to be seen as an artist." Those words reflected more than ambition. They reflected the emotional exhaustion of being frozen in time, defined by a moment she had outgrown. Interestingly, Simon Cowell's emotional reaction played an unexpected role in how the public received her transformation. When a judge known for his steel-skinned demeanor was moved to tears, viewers were forced to reconsider the significance of Darci's shift. Simon wasn't crying because the performance was flashy. He cried because he recognized bravery, growth, and the painful courage it takes for a former child star to reinvent herself before the world. From that point on, Darci's rebranding became clearer. She balanced her remaining family-friendly shows with a new focus on original music. She performed with guitar or piano instead of puppets, showed up to interviews as a singer-songwriter, and gradually allowed the world to meet the person behind the puppetry. She didn't abandon ventriloquism entirely. She simply refused to let it define her. And for the first time, people accepted that the little girl with the puppet had grown up. Her journey after Fantasy League wasn't about winning a trophy. It was about reclaiming her identity, and that, more than anything, is what made Simon Cowell wipe away tears on a night the world will not soon forget. Darci Lynne's story shows how much courage it takes to break free from expectations and grow into your true self. What part of her journey surprised you the most? If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. We have more powerful stories coming your way.